What a pleasure to be with you this morning. You've seen pictures of my family, know a little bit about us. My wife, Ashley, and I, we've been married for about 10 years, and we've got two little boys that are 5 and 3. In the early years of marriage, we really loved a good spontaneous trip. My wife was an elementary school teacher, and she would come home on a Friday afternoon, and if we didn't have anything planned, particularly for the weekend, on occasion we would say something along the lines of, "Hey, let's go somewhere this weekend." And so we'd get online and we'd price line a hotel, and we would just get in the car with one bag. We'd put like a bathing suit and something nice to wear to dinner and a book maybe, and we would just leave. That's what it took. We made a decision, we'd click online, we'd get a hotel, and then we would leave our house and we would go on this trip. It was delightful. Now, I know one thing about Crossings Community. This is a fruitful bunch. And so you know the joys, as I do, of no longer being able to do anything spontaneously. In fact, we came to worship in Katy this morning, and we were glad to do that, but even the joy of getting in the car and getting out here was not spontaneous. In fact, we were having the conversation as we got in the car, does our 3-year-old, does he have shoes? I don't know if he had, do you have shoes on? And he's back there, mm-mm. And, it's part of this journey now that we travel very differently in light of some life circumstances that have happened. We don't travel the same way we used to. And this morning, we're going to open a passage, and we're going to talk about the fact that there are life circumstances that change the way we travel through life. They radically reorient and reestablish the way that we travel, that we're all on this path of life, and there are things that alter the way that we think about how we travel down that road. And the passage that Matt and I discussed that I'm going to open up this morning to us is one that has actually shaped our collective identity as a church plant. We call ourselves 7 Mile Road because we resonate deeply with this passage in Luke chapter 24 that talks about a journey, and I think it's a journey that actually gives us a clear picture of how we are called to travel differently as a result of meeting the resurrected King. I'm convinced of this reality, that however we used to journey the path of life, that if we meet the resurrected King Jesus, the journey looks really different. We travel radically differently. And what we're aiming to do as a community down inside the loop is to be a community that embodies this different kind of journey, this different kind of travel. And this morning, I'd like to share that with you in hopes that it would encourage and challenge all of us as a community under God this morning to say, what does it look like to travel the road in response to meeting the resurrected King Jesus? Our passage is from Luke chapter 24. We're going to start in verse 13, and we'll kind of work through it in 3 different portions. But just before I read this passage for us, permit me to remind you what the prophet Isaiah says about the scriptures. The prophet Isaiah says, "The grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of God will stand forever." And so this morning, as a people, we come with this recognition that everything in the physical world that we can see and touch, it's moving towards chaos. It's coming undone. Some of us felt it in the bones creaking when we got out of bed this morning. That the physical world is coming undone. But when we come to the Word of God, we're in touch with something living and active and sharp and eternal, and we would be really wise to pay attention. Luke 24, starting in verse 13, would you follow along with me? It says this, "That very day, 2 of them were going to a village named Emmaus." Now, that very day is the day that Jesus walked out of a grave alive. The resurrected King is alive. And it says, This road to Emmaus was in about 7 miles from Jerusalem. So they're on the 7 Mile Road. Verse 14, they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. And while they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and he went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Verse 18, then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" This sweet dramatic irony, asking Jesus, are you the only one unaware of what's happening? Verse 19, And he said to them, "What things?" They said to him, "Concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb very early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb, and they found it as the woman had said, but him they did not see." Let's pause right there as we get situated with this story. This is a story of a couple of men recognized as disciples who meet the resurrected king. And as they do, the way that they travel changes dramatically. And the first thing that we see is the context into which the resurrected king comes and reveals himself. The context into which the resurrected king comes and reveals himself is as these two are journeying together. It's interesting, as we're introduced to these two and the path they're walking, as they journey together, it says that they walked and they were talking and sharing freely. There's 4 different words. I don't know if you caught this. In verse 14 and 15, it says they were talking with each other. And then in verse 15, it says they were talking and discussing with one another. And Jesus shows up and he says, "What is this conversation you're having?" The context into which Jesus steps into this journey is 2 men who are walking and they're sharing freely. They're talking, they're discussing. And when Jesus asks them, "What is it you're talking about?" they're saying, "Don't you know?" And just before they answer him, they stop, and you can almost imagine them pausing, shoulders drooping, and it says they looked sad. And they said, "Don't you know? We used to hope, but we don't anymore." Did you catch that? Their hope is in the past tense. They say, "We had hoped that this Jesus was going to come and make everything okay." The context into which Jesus reveals himself as the resurrected king is a community that's journeying together, honestly, truly. They're sharing their hearts and all of their sadness and their disappointments. And I think for our purposes this morning, as we talk about what does it mean to intersect Jesus along the road, we have to first recognize that a community willing to journey together in honesty and in truth is one of the very contexts within which the resurrected king throughout time has consistently revealed himself. I've found the hard way that journeying as a collective of individuals is exhausting. I don't know if you immediately understand what I mean, right? That idea of journeying as a collective of individuals is exhausting. In my early years in ministry, I was a youth pastor. And in those early years of ministry, I had just married my beautiful wife. She moved from Kansas City. We moved to Houston. And we were situating into this new life, new community, new challenges. And in those early years of ministry and marriage, I had some really dear friends around me that I loved, some of whom I still count dear friends. I had this beautiful wife that I was now sharing my home and my life with, but what I began to realize is that I really, in retrospect, was just journeying as a collective of individuals. And the reason was because I was still living in darkness. I had a secret sin that I was cultivating that no one really knew about. I was slowly becoming a divided person that was one way publicly. I was creating a really strong reputation, mostly because I could do this, right? Because I could stand and I could speak about Jesus. And so that developed a certain amount of reputation and expectation as to who I was. But even my wife, those that were closest to me, didn't fully know what was going on inside of me. And what I found is that it was exhausting. It was devastating. In the Psalms, the psalmist talks about when I was silent about my sin, my bones wasted away within me. And what I find is that we interact with a couple of guys that are on this path, and they're just speaking freely about their disappointments, their hopes. They're really being known. And into that space, Jesus begins to reveal himself as the resurrected king. And I find that so often we in cultural Christianity, people who are involved in the life of the church, who are joining together in family, that I lived this space for a long time where I was just playing a really elaborate hiding game. and my bones were wasting away. We moved to Boston, and I connected with a mentor. He's actually the pastor of a church that shares the same name as ours, 7 Mile Road, Malden, who is a partner from a distance that we love dearly. And I began to walk with this man, and he lived with a freedom and a vulnerability that was so tenacious, it was unsettling. We would sit down with one another, and he was my pastor, mind you, and we would sit down, and he would just start sharing so honestly and aggressively about the weaknesses and brokenness and sin in his heart, because he was convinced that if we journey together, this will be better. That's where we'll find health. That's where we'll meet the resurrected King. And for months, I just showed up and squirmed because I was terribly uncomfortable that he wanted to journey together, and I wanted to be a collective of individuals. Can we just parallel one another but not really have our lives knit together at this deep level? And as I saw the freedom and the joy that he was walking in, he was committed to this reality that if you live 99% in the light, you live in the darkness. If you're maintaining a dark place that you can still kind of crawl back to and hide in, whether it's just a brokenheartedness, a weakness, a sinful reality, something that keeps you from really journeying together, we may end up missing the resurrected King in all of his glory and might and the way that we were intended to meet him. You see, it was as I began to realize that I was invited into this gift of journeying together, I realized it's a privilege. It's a beautiful gift in Christian community to say, hey, let's journey together in a real way. I want to share freely. I want you to share freely. And in that space, I am confident that we will experience the power and the presence of the resurrected King. These two men shared their hearts freely. And what I have found since walking on this journey and beginning to feel the freedom and the joy of being known is that being able to invite others into that and continue to experience the joy is really profound. Even this past week, I was sitting with a friend, someone that I've been praying for and longing will find themselves along the 7 Mile Road with us. Someone that was nominally Catholic and has not been in church of any sort in 10 plus years. But as we've been eating breakfast week after week and opening the Gospel of John together, sharing our lives truly, saying, this is who I am and who are you and what does that mean in light of this? His comment to me was music to my ears this week. He said, this has been the ideal setting within which to discover faith in Jesus. What he was saying was that when we journey together, the resurrected King shows up. And so I would just pose this question before we move forward. Is yours a story of journeying together truly with those around you? Or have you begun to slide into this experience of just being a collective of individuals? In your own home, with the person that shares your bed with you? With your community group, with the people around you? Are you really risking the vulnerability and the willingness to journey together and say, I need you to come in and know me in this space? I've come to realize that there's a number of reasons why we don't do it. One is that we want to protect our reputation. We want to save face. If people really knew, we think, would they keep journeying with me? If they really knew what was going on in my heart and my family and my marriage and my stuff, if I invited them into that point of discomfort, what would that really be like? If I were able to say, I used to hope, like our friends along the 7 Mile Road did. They talked about their hope freely in the past tense. That's vulnerability and honesty. Is it just a sense of self-preservation? I think even below that, oftentimes we're cultivating a sense of fear. I know that was very true for me. I was paralyzed by my fear. I don't know what I will do if exposed. Is it that you value speed over health? Life is moving fast. I've got a lot going on at work. The kids are always going. There's this stuff. And yes, there's this thing. There's this space. There's this area where I can still hide and still be in the dark. And I'm not really journeying together with my spouse or my friends or my accountability people in life. But the truth is, it would just be really messy and it would slow me down if we all went into that. And there's too much going on and now's not the time. You know, in the same way that my wife and I sat down, I see that my son Caleb, the shoeless one, just entered the room this morning. In the same way that we thought, does he have shoes, right? All of a sudden, what used to be, we could just hop in the car and go. As the community grows and as we journey together, we slow down. It gets messier and harder, and there's more questions to answer. But the truth is, as the old proverb says, you can go fast by yourself, but you'll go further together. And so the invitation to start, if we're going to walk this 7-mile road, if we're going to journey in response to the resurrected King, the first reality is that we journey together, not alone. We journey together, not alone. And as we do, we're going to continue reading in verse 25 to 32. But what we're going to see is this: when we journey together and not alone, we behold Jesus and not ourselves. Look with me in verse 25 and following. And Jesus said to them, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them all the scriptures and the things concerning himself. Verse 28, so they drew near to the village to which they were going, and he acted as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, for it's towards evening. The day is now far spent." So he went in to stay with them. And when he was at the table with them, he took bread and he blessed it and he broke it and he gave it to them. And their eyes were open and they recognized him. And he vanished from their sight. And then catch this in verse 32. It says, they said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us along the road, while he opened to us the scriptures?" Now you see, as they were journeying together, the resurrected King intersects their path. And he readjusts their vision. Did you catch this? They were walking with Jesus, but we read earlier in the passage, but their eyes were kept from seeing him. They didn't recognize what was right in front of them. The reason, they were bound up in themselves. They were walking, and all they could find themselves to talk about was, what had we really hoped? We had hoped that Jesus would come and fix our circumstances here and now. We thought he was going to get rid of the Romans, he was going to fix everything, and we would finally have our shalom, our peace, this little space that we've carved out in life now. And they were so focused on what they had been hoping for, what their sights had been set on, that Jesus shows up, and it says their eyes were kept from recognizing him. They don't even know who's walking with them. And Jesus shows up and he begins to readjust their vision. It starts with something that's startling, right? His first statement, "Oh, foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe." In essence, he's saying, stop, right? Open your eyes. Look differently. Do we feel the dramatic irony in the story of these people, shoulders slumped, woe is me, we had hoped Jesus was going to set us free, and the resurrected King of Glory is walking with them. Do we feel let's enter the absurdity of the moment as they're missing it. And Jesus goes, okay, just stop for a second. Oh, foolish ones, let me tell you some good news. And he begins to open the scriptures to them. He begins to show them what it is that they're actually supposed to be looking for. And the truth is, until we're looking for the right thing, we're just not going to find it. I remember one of my first trips home with Ashley. She's from just outside of Kansas City, Missouri. And her dad is can fix anything. He's a cars and boat guy. Or cars and boats. They're both plural, right? Like he'll just as many and however many he can get his hands on and working on and fixing. And he's got a garage full of tools. And when his wife fell in love, she fell in love with an academic theologian type that has bookshelves full and no toolbox. Actually, still don't own one. And so my first trip to spend time with Howard, maybe it was the second, he invited me to work on a project with him. And I was very eager to please and to win him over. And so we engage in this project. And he's laying on the ground working on something. And his toolbox, kind of bigger toolbox, was across the garage. And we're working. And there were several times where he asked me to go and to retrieve a tool for him, the name of which I had never heard of, right? he could have been speaking Vietnamese for all I know. He was saying words, I know, but there was zero meaning being translated. And so he'd say the name of this, tool, and I would think, yeah. He'd say, can you grab that for me? Sure, I can. Because I didn't want to expose my own folly. So I walk across, and I remember vividly sweating as I'm looking in his toolbox, and he's laying on the ground waiting for me to retrieve this tool. And I'm thinking, okay, the moose grabber thing, whatever he called it, and I'm looking, I'm like, which one looks like this? I just had no idea what I was looking for. And it was going to be a failure for sure. It happened 2 or 3 times before I finally said, you're just going to have to describing what they look like. Just tell me how long it is and what it looks like, because this game's not working, Howard. And I think secretly he knew. I think he was just wanting me to come to the space where I'd say, you know more about tools than me. Maybe it was part of the bonding experience, I guess. But the truth is that I was thinking about this idea that as long as we don't know what we're looking for, we're just not going to find it. And the struggle is that as we begin to journey together, that so often we can still miss what's right in front of us. These guys are sharing freely, but they miss Jesus in their midst, and it's because they don't know what they're looking for. They think that Jesus exists to make all of this peachy and okay. They think when the Messiah comes, he's going to answer all of our temporal prayers, and he's going to make everything that's been difficult for me go away. He's going to fix this. This is going to be okay. And when that doesn't happen, they sadly share, but they don't see the hope that's right in front of them. And Jesus says, oh, foolish ones. Would you open your eyes, take a breath, and realize that I've come to do something far grander, more beautiful, more powerful, more longer lasting than you ever dared dream. I didn't come to take care of Romans. I came to take care of Satan, sin, and death. Would you open your Old Testament with me? And he begins to say the story of history has found its climax in me. That he begins to give them eyes to see what it is that history has been about. You see, the reality in this moment is that he's reshaping their vision. He's actually helping them know what to be looking for. And I think so often in our journey, we miss the hope and the joy of the resurrected King that's right in front of us because we're just not looking right. I was reminded of a friend that's looking well recently. He's an old friend of mine that's been single longer than he had hoped. And if you have friends or if you yourself are walking through that, you know that can be a difficult journey. But he made a comment to me recently. And he said, this is a gift. I want to be married. I want to be a family man. This is a gift. I can use my time for the sake of God's kingdom, and I receive it as a gift. And what I heard in that moment was that he knows what he's looking for. I'll say it to you like this. When we realize that the defining moment of our lives happened long before we were born, it reshapes the way we experience everything. I'll say that again. When you realize that the defining moment of your life happened long before you were born, it reshapes the way that you look at life. That's the difference between journeying together and focusing on ourselves. The doors are closed and the windows are shut. We may be sharing freely, but if we're starting to focus on the weakness, the struggle, the promise that we're still waiting for that hasn't been met, or as opposed to flinging open the doors and opening the windows and going, God's working on an eternal timeline that is phenomenal. Because the defining event of my life has already happened, I have a secured, stunning, eternal hope that will never waver. And as I share my weaknesses and you share yours, we all of a sudden look back at one another and say, praise God, that doesn't define you. The defining moment of your life happened in the past, and then all of a sudden it's like, whew, that mountain breeze starts to blow through. And we say, oh, this is far different than I immediately recognized. Because as we journey together and we set our gaze unwaveringly on the completed work of Jesus, this path gets transformed. And it gets transformed to such a point that as their hearts begin to burn within them, saying, we truly have an unshakable hope. That now all of a sudden with vulnerability and confidence, I can continue to share because that doesn't define me. And you can do the same. And in that space, their path transforms. Look at verse 33 with me. It says this, they rose that same hour and they returned to Jerusalem. They found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together saying, the Lord has risen indeed and he has appeared to Simon. Then they told him what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. Now, those of you who are paying attention as we were reading the passage, a little interactive game here. What time of day was it? Do we remember? Evening. It says the day was well spent. They've already traveled 7 miles. We catch this? These guys just walked 7 miles from Jerusalem and they started like this. 7 miles of that, right? But they were sharing their hearts, and the resurrected king shows up, and they get home, and the day is well spent, and they've just walked 7 miles, and what do they say? We got to go back to Jerusalem. Everybody's got to know. The defining event of our lives happened way back there, and nothing can shake it. The king is on the throne. We've got to go. Do you feel the difference of the path? The 7-mile road becomes the 14-mile road as they go running back to Jerusalem and say, all right, all the rumors, all this, it's all true. He's alive. He broke the bread. We saw the crumbs. He was there. And then poof, he was gone and my heart was on fire. And it's all true. Do you feel the shift in the road? They travel differently when they've met the resurrected king. You see a community that journeys together honestly and actively and unwaveringly beholds Jesus as a community that spreads hope, not sadness. You see, that's the last journey. That's the last leg of the journey, that we begin to be a people that carry hope everywhere we go. That it's like it's spilling out of us. It gets on people who get too close to us because the defining event of our lives happened in the past. So no matter what's going on in these circumstances now, I know where my joy and hope and life and eternity lie. And so I don't have it all perfect, and I can mourn in the midst of sadness, but even in my mourning, I mourn with hope. Hope bubbles over. It's my story. And it can be yours too. Do you feel it? That's the journey. They go running saying, it can be yours too. The king is on the throne. And so we as 7 Mile Road are church planting because we're committed to journey together and to behold Jesus. And as we do, the dam of mission is broken in our hearts. It breaks forth. That when a community is honest about who they are and they see Jesus for who he is, in that space we go, we got to go tell people. This needs to be part of a revolutionary, viral movement that goes block by block as hope spills out of our lives. That's what we're called to. That's what we have the distinct privilege and pleasure to be a part of. We get to spread hope. We say that we exist to embody and to declare God's redemptive story to every Houstonian. 7 Mile Road exists with the hope, with the aim, with the commitment to have a holy dissatisfaction until every Houstonian has had multiple opportunities to see and touch and to hear that there is a king on the throne and the defining event of history happened long ago and that we can live with hope. And so the invitation this morning is simple. Would you travel differently in light of the resurrected king? If right now you're traveling as a collective of individuals, if you are one that has maintained a piece of darkness to run back to and hide in, I'm inviting you to run to the light. Be known. You don't have to keep living in that space with your bones wasting. And as you do, would you lock arms with this community that has decided to set their gaze firmly on Jesus? And realize that even in that space, there's joy and there's hope to be had. And as you taste it, would you spread hope? Who is it right now that you need to be praying for? That neighbor, that friend, that coworker that needs the hope of Christ to bubble over and to spill onto their lives. That this is the privilege and the call and the responsibility for us as the church. We travel differently because we journey together, we behold Jesus, and we spread hope. I'm going to close this in prayer, and as I do, there will be folks willing to pray with you, as is always the case here in the back of the room. And if there's something that has everything to do with this message or nothing to do with this message, I would invite you to pray with them. If it's about needing to be known and not live in the darkness anymore, would you go pray with someone? If you just need someone to stand with you and to help you fix your eyes back on Jesus, would you go pray with someone? And if there's someone in your life that needs the hope of Jesus, would you go pray their name with someone in the back in hopes that even this week you could be that source of hope by God's grace? Would you please join me in praying? So gracious God and Father, I stand before you a grateful son, unworthy to come so boldly into your presence. You are the creator and the king of the universe. Your word is alive and strong, and to see you in all of your glory would leave us quaking, falling to our faces as dead men and women. Yet you let us, by the blood and the covering of Jesus Christ, the one who has conquered Satan, sin, and death at the cross, you let us come boldly into your presence and lay ourselves before you. And I am grateful for that. And I pray that these men and women in this community, that the Crossings Community Church would be a space, God, where people journey together in honest and vulnerable and true ways. And as they do, they experience the nearness of the resurrected King. Jesus, you are on the throne, and I pray that we would taste that more and more even this week. And as a result, that all of us would spread hope with urgency and joy and confidence and anticipation for what it is you're going to do in our midst. We bless you and we thank you. We pray it in the matchless name of our resurrected King Jesus.